This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovator's Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
Welcome to Killer Innovations. I'm your host, Phil McKinney. We are back here in the studio. We've been covering a lot of really kind of broad topics around the show, but today we're talking specifically around something that you as a listener have heard me rant about before, which is innovation commercialization and how hard it really is to take that idea and turn it into a meaningful impact of an innovation in the marketplace. Today, we have a different perspective on that. It's not just about the innovations happening inside of businesses, but how do you take innovations that are occurring in research institutions and turn those into companies, products, services that has broad impact? Today, we have two guests with us, Flavio Lobato and John Dorizio. I'm going to pronounce that wrong, and I'll apologize for that right up front, guys. But welcome to the show. Appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thanks for having us, Phil.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you so much.
So give us a little bit of background. You guys are taking a little bit of a different approach to taking a look at trying to commercialize innovations from research institutions. And as we talked before we started the show, I shared with you my background in the late 80s and early 90s of trying this back then, and it's got really frustrated in the whole experience. But you guys also have taken a little bit of a different approach. But give us a little bit of background on your own backgrounds and the company that you're with. So Flavio, why don't you start us off? Give us a little bit of background on yourself.
Sure, Phil. Thank you for having us again. So very quickly, my background is in finance. I was in Wall Street since the 90s in places like Goldman and Credit Suisse, and later started and worked in the hedge fund industry where managed quite substantial amounts of assets. You know, my firm went through an exit, and basically 5 years ago, we began to look into this space.
And John, give us a little bit of your background.
Yeah, so my background, just always been passionate about the startup world, seeing creative problems and finding unique solutions to those problems. So really being hands-on, and that's taken me from founding a business incubator in Naples, Florida, to social business development opportunities in Haiti, and then obviously technology commercialization out of the Midwest.
So tell us a little bit about your firm. How did you get started, and what do you guys focus on?
Sure. So Ikove comes from the Tupi-Guarani. I'm actually Brazilian, and that's the native language of where I come from, and it means growth. And it's like that is initial part of life, and this is exactly what we're trying to do. Given my background, we looked at the technology commercialization market and saw that there was a massive opportunity here, but really very little in terms of commercialization. Almost $70 billion invested every year in basic research through universities, and I think the latest numbers that we have is that less than 1% of that is actually invested in commercialization. At the same time, as you probably well know, the VC, the venture capital industry, is going through a transition where it's really moving away from early stage investing, and a lot of the money is now going towards much later stage. So, the ability of technologies or early stage companies to get funding is just much harder. So that so-called valley of death, and is very alive today. So what Ikove really does is really bridge a gap between lab and market, and do so with a lot of support that we can, talk a little more as the show goes on.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. You mentioned it, $70 billion, 1% ever gets commercialized. I probably would argue back when I was doing spin out technologies from the University of Illinois, it was, 1/4 of that. It's about 1/4%. But so the market, albeit it has moved, it's still a huge challenge, though. What's the biggest hindrance from getting, you got really smart researchers in all these universities. What's the challenge? What's the stumbling block to get something out of a university and actually turn it into some kind of a commercial success?
John, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think there are a number of factors, Phil. One, you have an institution that it might not be set up with a structure and a mindset for commercialization. So you look at how the incentives are aligned, and the way that Ikove tackles that is bringing individuals, the stakeholders, the universities, the researchers, the inventor team on and having them continue to develop the technology or the company with us. So creating that early incentive and alignment is critical for the first stage of what we do.
I think it's interesting. I mean, one of the challenges we had back when I was looking at this, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, was some of the state laws actually prevented professors from benefiting from their research because they were technically state employees. So you had these great researchers, and are you going to give up tenure to go try to do commercialization to avoid getting sideways on conflict of interest laws?
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a big problem, and still exists today. And to some extent, as you know, the IP is owned by the universities and not the researcher. So what really the researcher is getting at the end of the day is a piece of the royalties or that the university ends up getting. But really, it's not really a motivating factor for them to walk away. And to be honest, most of them do not want to walk away, right? They're not business people. They want to do what they love to do, which is research and invent and really innovate. And what we've really come together is with a structure approach where, first of all, we're not looking at one-offs. So, it's not a approach where we're coming to XYZ university and we're looking for a one-off deal. We're looking to build a long-term relationship and build a partnership with the university to help them identify, the incredible technologies that are in development and then, we do a lot of vetting. We have a very, sophisticated team within Ikove that, vets these different technologies. But at the end of the day, it's aligning, like John mentioned, and making sure that the inventor is also, a part of it, not necessarily as involved in the day-to-day of the business, but that he has that alignment of interest through the new company that's created. And a lot of the work that we ended up doing on the development of the technology is through the university, through the labs, which also, goes really well within our strategy of lowering costs and leveraging the existing infrastructure that's already in place.
So when you're vetting, because that's you've got lots, you said $70 billion of funding goes to universities for research. What do you look for? How do you identify from your vetting process those characteristics of things that would be ones that you would select? What do you look for?
Yeah, so, even to step back on that 70 billion, right? I mean, we have another layer on our strategy, which is we decided, first of all, we go to the source of innovation. And the other one is we go where very few people are looking. So from our perspective, we're not going to the coasts. We're not going to, New York or Boston. I mean, I'm very involved, with HBS. I actually, I'm part of the angel network at HBS and advise, on the student advisory board of Harvard iLabs. So I see a lot of that, right? They don't need my help. I mean, they're doing fine. But, when you look into the Midwest, right, specifically, you see 25+% of that 70 billion is invested in the Midwest, right? However, that value of that I mentioned before is greatly exacerbated in the Midwest because whilst 25% is invested in terms of R&D, only 3% of venture capital dollars are actually invested in the region, right? So when we looked at that statistics, we said, okay, this is where we want to be because there's, incredible innovation. There's an amazing infrastructure, right? So that's the first layer, right? We're based in Columbus, Ohio, and we've decided to, set our initial operations in the region. Second of all, we've structured, our startup nursery with basically right now we have 3 verticals. We're launching a 4th vertical. The first vertical is STEM, science, technology, and math. MedTech, primarily regenerative medicines, and agri-tech. And we're launching a fintech vertical by the end of the year.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. You talked a little bit about the startup nursery. Give us just a quick highlight of what is the startup nursery? What is it?
Yeah, the Startups Nursery is basically our way of tackling this problem by bringing in all of the resources. So the global network that we've developed over the years through various endeavors, bringing in stakeholders, bringing in inventors and experts in their fields to continue the development, to add that extra layer and that extra firepower that's needed to get this from lab to market. So that's also, a service model that we have access to centralized accounting and legal and intellectual property and all of the different various components that a startup would need.
Yeah, I like the term nursery, because you always hear about incubators and accelerators. You don't need the incubator. You need to grow it in the form of whether it's an agricultural nursery, you're in a greenhouse growing it, or you got a baby idea that you got to mature it. So when we come back, we're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, we're going to continue on our conversation here, and don't be going anywhere. We'll be right back. You're listening to Killer Innovations. Welcome back to Killer Innovations. We're picking up our conversation with Flavio Lebedo and John D'Orazio from Ikove, which is a kind of, I don't know how to describe you guys. I try to think about a title for you. I don't want to use it as research commercialization. What do you guys call yourself? When you describe what you do in a name, what is the name you use?
It's venture development.
Venture development. Actually, I like that.
Yeah.
Now, it's interesting that you guys you've picked up on you don't need to be at the coast. There's plenty of risk capital there, and expertise and resources in the Midwest. In fact, I did a show back right around the first of the year where I was in Paducah, Kentucky, in the mobile studio, interviewing a husband and wife innovation team there doing some really interesting work. And I'm a big believer that everything doesn't have to happen. I spent most of my career when I was CTO at HP in Silicon Valley, but there's a lot of great work going on all across the country. So talk a little bit more about the Midwest. What are you seeing? What are the institutions you're engaged with?
Sure. So we're based in Columbus, Ohio, like I mentioned to you before. So our initial relationships that we developed was naturally with the Ohio State University. It's just an incredible institution, and as you well know, one of the largest research institutions in the United States, with about $1 billion in basic R&D every year. Down the road in Dayton, Ohio, you have Wright State University that's connected through the Wright Brothers Institute, which is really the Air Force. You have the AFRL, the Air Force Research Laboratories, with another $4 billion or so. And then you have incredible, healthcare and R&D and in places like, the James Cancer Center, you have Cleveland Clinic, so on and so forth. So Central Ohio boasts $6 billion a year in basic research. So, we don't need to go really very far to find some, incredible technologies and to bring it to market.
Yeah, you happen to pick. Well, I would have probably persuaded you to go to Urbana-Champaign for University of Illinois, but I'm biased in that situation, right?
Well, we're just getting started, so we definitely see that growth path coming, and we'll be expanding our reach, very quickly.
Well, it's also interesting, and we saw this at University of Illinois when I was doing commercialization with them, about the number of students who leave. If you've got grads or postdocs who are doing some really interesting research and they want to commercialize, they think they have to go run to Silicon Valley or to Boston or to Austin in order to commercialize it, and you lose a lot of brain power that's educated locally but leaves the area.
Right.
Go ahead.
Absolutely. Yeah, and in a lot of cases that's kind of forced upon by the industry, right? The VC industry wants them to move to the valley. They want to be close to where companies are going to be located. So historically, that has been the case in a very significant way. Our thesis is that that is not the case. We think that there is just a lot happening. There's I think the numbers in terms of engineers per capita in the Midwest are some of the largest in the world. So in terms of infrastructure, it's just, fantastic. And it costs us 40% less to run a company in Columbus, Ohio, than it does to run it in the coast. So it's a huge cost advantage, especially in the early days.
Yeah, well, that's one of the reasons why I live in Colorado now, and not in Silicon Valley. We have a staff of about 200 here, and we can operate much more efficiently here than we could ever in the Valley.
Absolutely.
But some of the challenges of these commercializations is you get them to a certain stage, but you still are going to need to bring in outside capital. Mm-hmm. How do you think about that after you've got them in your nursery and you get them to a certain stage? You're doing early stage funding. How do you bring together that network of later stage funding so that you got a clearer funding model to sustain these growing businesses?
John, should I take that? Or
sure. I think that's more appropriate.
Yeah, so I think that's what's very unique about what we built. Even though Ikove is based out of Columbus, our reach is global, and that is through the partnership that we have in place. Myself, I was part of an $8 billion hedge fund in my previous life, and very successful career over a 25 year span in finance. So during that lifetime, I built incredible relationships all over the world. And we've been able to bring in almost $30 million of direct funding to our companies without pretty much having $1 coming from VCs. So it's all, leading families and family offices around the world that, believe in what we're doing, believe in innovation. And, it's kind of the cherry on the pie on the entire model. So, we have, in one of our, we can talk a little bit more about that, but the latest round for one of our companies had investors coming from 10 countries.
Wow. So it really does give a global view to the opportunity, not just the typical regional VCs like, do you go to Morgenthaler in Cleveland or Frontenac in Chicago or something like that?
We're definitely not regional, like us, I think it's important to note that, the innovation is coming from the Midwest. It doesn't necessarily mean that, the best final location for the companies are going to be in the Midwest. Mm-hmm. So, we have companies that are based in New York, in the Valley, in China. I mean, it's really a global opportunity.
I think, Phil, also that gives us a reach into the other side of it. So how do you match these technologies to industry and ask the questions about market readiness and who cares really, and how do you want to implement this technology? So our previous backgrounds working with industry have allowed us to open those doors and build those relationships to help essentially work those technologies into the market.
Well, I think it's interesting because you guys have the specific verticals. And one of the challenges we had in commercialization was product market fit. You had an innovation. Right. Innovation does not equal product and does not equal market fit. It's attaching that product market fit that determines success or failure, correct?
Right. Yeah, that's correct. Absolutely. So
that's huge.
Go ahead.
I was going to say that's a huge part of our vetting and validation phase of the business, where we're looking at this technology and asking those hard questions, working with the inventor team to see what's really out there, doing intellectual property disclosures and research and really all of the groundwork that you would need to do that a traditional startup would go through.
So we're going to take another quick break here, but there's two questions I want you to think about while we go to commercial break, come back in the next segment to answer. One is you talk about a little bit about the services you provide to the company. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But then I'm interested specifically on a couple of examples of your companies and kind of the process they went through. Because ultimately what I want to give the listener today is a little bit of insight on how they could do a better job of preparing themselves for avoiding some of the struggles that even your companies have experienced. So
absolutely.
So when we come back, we're going to pick up our conversation. Don't go anywhere. You're listening to Killer Innovations on the BizTalk Radio Network. Welcome back to Killer Innovations. I'm your host, Phil McKinney. We're continuing our conversation with Flavio and John, the founders of Ikove Capital, which has kind of a unique, different model on commercializing the innovations from research institutions, such as Cleveland Clinic, Ohio State University, Wright Center, and many others. But before we jump in on talking about some of your sample companies, give me just a snapshot of why are you guys different, right? You describe yourselves a little bit differently, but I want to make sure I get it and the listeners get it. What do you guys do that's different?
Well, Phil, I think the key concept here is, first of all, the people, right? So, John and I, together with Rodolfo Bellesi and Dr. Rob Lee, founded Ikove. So we have a very complementary team with different skill sets, but also is a founder mentality. When we're getting involved, there's an IP, there's a great idea, there's a lot of R&D that has been invested into this technology, but there's no companies. We're going in and actually, once we identify and vet the technology, we bring it into the startup nursery. I mean, we are building a team around that technology to launch it as an independent startup company, right? And that's critical because we're in at the early days. We're providing, de-risking the business along the way using our different skill sets of the different founders, from, legal, accounting. Dr. Rob Lee was the chair of the Electrical and Computer Engineering Department at Ohio State. I mean, so we're very lucky to have that type of let's say, team around us to make it successful. But the founder mentality is critical. So
one way I guess I would describe it also is you are active capital versus passive capital. It isn't a pay and pray kind of a model. You are in it to try to ensure that success.
Yes, yeah, I don't think capital's the answer in commercialization because there already is so much invested. It's really more of this hands-on mentality of how do you execute on this in a really tough ecosystem. How do you bring resources to bear to really go through what a traditional company would go through to execute their product and vision to market?
So, hey, John, why don't you give us an example of one of the companies that you guys have worked with and tell us a little bit about them and some of the experiences of going through this whole process?
Yeah, so one unique one, Flavio mentioned we do some work in med tech and regenerative medicine. A number of years ago, we partnered with a private research group here in Columbus, Ohio. And they have basically an electrospun polymer technology that replicates the extracellular matrix. So that sounds, nice and fancy, but what it allows us to do is allows cells to express naturally. And so, for example, we have an application in wound care where we can regrow hair follicles. This was a product that has had 9 years of development, multi-millions in funding, and we recently got it through FDA approval back in March. So a huge milestone, but really bringing a lot of our talent and resources and just execution expertise to bear to make that happen.
Well, getting FDA approval is a key milestone, right? We've done some work with some companies doing laser work. Kim McNicholas, another host here at the Innovators Network, has been working with some companies. We've had them on here on the show, but man, the FDA hurdle can be just absolutely daunting. Is that part of what you did with the nursery then, was to help them through that process then?
Absolutely.
Say, Flavio, you got another example of another company that you guys have worked with to give us another kind of insight on how you work with them?
Yes, it's actually our first baby, our first graduate, let's say, of the startup nursery is a company called Nikola Labs. And Nikola Labs is homage to Nikola Tesla, of course. And, Tesla was taken, so we went with Nikola. And basically, what the technology does, let me just step back. I mean, we're not just picking technologies for technology's sake. We have a top-down macro view of where we see the world going, right? And technology teams that we look at. And one of the key themes that we see is the advent of IoT, the Internet of Things, right? So Internet of Things, by 2025, the expectation is to have 75 billion sensors, tethered all over the world. And basically, through that, there's a new advent called smart cities, smart homes, and I call it Smart X, right? And the only reason it's called Smart X is because you have sensors attached to stuff, right? And these sensors are communicating with the cloud and providing data, right? The problem with this is that now you're going to have 75 billion devices. And first of all, how are you going to power those devices, right? Are you going to do, you cannot really hardwire this stuff. And what are you going to do with batteries? I mean, you're just creating a monstrous, problem in terms of maintenance, right? So we've selected, wireless charging as a way to express our view into taking advantage of this macro theme, which is the advent of IoT, right? And our technology, which was developed at the electroscience labs at Ohio State, which is one of the most successful labs of its kind in the world, has the ability to power low power sensors from a distance up to 30 feet. So, we do have a key technology that is going to enable a major team to develop, right? And that's what really Nikola Labs does. And that's how we think. I mean, we have this top-down process, and then we match it with a bottom-up identification of the technology that's going to go and make that and express that view with that macro team, so to speak.
Well, it's interesting that you picked them as the example, right? One is if you're an engineer, you should know that Nikola Tesla's big thing was wireless transmission of electricity.
Yeah.
And I'm located here in Colorado, albeit he did the experiments in Colorado Springs, where he would put out the huge lightning bolts in an attempt to try to figure out a way to transmit electricity.
Very appropriate.
Very appropriate. And it's interesting. You got kind of a wide range of interests, though, right? Everything from biomedical to, this interest. What are, we got maybe another minute here. What are why these? Are there particular things that you see coming over the horizon that you think Ikove should be playing?
I mean, another great, AI, it's another, everyone talks about, artificial intelligence. Our play in AI is through behavioral AI, and it's really understanding human behavior to predict, decisions. And we've been able to successfully predict elections. We're testing in the stock market, with brands. I mean, it's just unlimited possibilities. Robotics is another great theme. I mean, we see industrial robotics as a huge theme going forward, and we have a technology called circular wave drive that is a key component of industrial robots, basically 40% of that cost structure, and we're going to disrupt that industry. So it's really interesting. We're not forced. We're using our own capital, so we're not in a rush. I mean, we are able to really spend the time and the money and the resources and build the right teams to really identify that and launch these very successful startups in deep tech. Right?
Well, I think that's key because in the case of innovation, patience is the one thing that tends to be the lacking portion of this. Right? We think we can manage a timeline when there's still discovery that has to be made at some part in the process of turning that into a product. So what's next for Ikove? You've been around for 3 years. You've got 10 companies. You've created $150 million in equity value. What's next for you guys?
I think what's the last, is going through an exit. And I think that will happen over the next 12 to 18 months. We'll be able to prove out the entire concept. And then slowly expanding the nursery to other regions and testing that out. I think that this is a global opportunity, and there are many places around the world that also need this type of resources. So we have a plan over the next 2 to 5 years to really have different areas based in Asia, Europe, so on and so forth, to take advantage of this global opportunity.
Perfect. So people want to follow you real quick. What's the best place for them to keep track of what you guys are doing at Ikove? We just got a few seconds left.
Our website is ikovecapital.com. Check it out. We have a lot of information. If you're interested, reach out to us. We'd love to talk about what we're doing and hopefully do some stuff together.
Perfect. We'll have all those links up in the show notes over at Killer Innovations. Flavio, John, thanks for taking the time out of your schedule to join us here on Killer Innovations. For those of you here listening to the show, don't go anywhere. The next segment is our 5 minutes to new ideas. It's the new segment, new format, trying this out to give you some actionable help in generating that next idea that leads to a killer innovation. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this quick commercial break. This segment of the show I call 5 minutes to new ideas. Designed for the creative mind looking for that next great idea. Each episode will challenge you to think differently about yourself and your business by asking unique, funny, and sometimes crazy questions. Get your notebook out and be ready to uncover that game-changing idea. Here is 5 minutes to new ideas. Once a product is sold, it's pretty much out of your control. You may have an idea why people will buy it and what they will do with it, but the most you can ever do is just guess. So why are you assuming that you know what your customers actually likes and values about your product and how they use it to solve problems they have? One of my favorite blogs to read when I have downtime is IKEAhackers.net. IKEA Hackers is just what it sounds like. A place where people can show off the ways in which they have repurposed and customized IKEA products. Some of the hacks are pretty impressive for a DIY home engineer. Example, hanging a bed frame to the wall so it can flip up like a Murphy bed. Others are similar and much simpler in fact, such as using printed curtains as fabric for a dress. Still others just are creative genius. For example, the financially strapped parents of baby twins who created a feeding station by cutting 2 baby seat-sized holes in their IKEA kitchen table, probably deserves a job in the design and innovation department at IKEA. These hackers are an extreme and sometimes funny example of unanticipated uses, but I use them here to reinforce an important point. It's easy to lock yourself into thinking that you fully understand who is using your product and how they are using it. There's the reason the question, quote, "Who is my customer?" end quote, is not a killer question. It sets you up to get an obvious and easy answer rather than forcing you to look outside of what you know to be true about the people who use and appreciate your products. I myself have experienced this disconnect between how I assume my product is used and how it is actually used. My wife and I had a favorite bakery near where we lived in Silicon Valley. The bakery was a small operation that makes great cakes and cupcakes. It's one of those places where there's always a line out the door on Saturday afternoon, and my wife loved to take her time, which means that I spent a lot of time there too. Now back around 2010, we stopped in to grab a quick snack. As we contemplated vanilla versus chocolate, I noticed an HP TouchSmart set up on the corner of the counter. Now naturally, I went over to check it out. Now, the TouchSmart was the first PC that users could interact with by touch. It's got a ton of applications. A busy, overscheduled family can use it as a hub computer for the home, running their calendars off of and coordinating and communicating with one another. My wife uses hers while she cooks. She goes online to find recipes and coupons or to check her email. Sometimes she entertains friends with a streaming music or plays mahjong while they hang out in the kitchen. Designers and artists, such as the contestants on Project One Way, can use it to digitally sketch out images and ideas that need to be easily and instantly shared. However, in all our design and marketing meetings, it had never occurred to us that the TouchSmart could be used as a customer-facing kiosk in the retail market. Yet this is precisely what the owner of the bakery had done. He had bought a TouchSmart and had written his own simple sales application. Each image, be it chocolate brownie or a 3-tiered wedding cake, click through to an ordering screen. The customer could customize their orders at their leisure and place it without waiting in the extremely long lines that this bakery had. I was impressed, to say the least, and stunned that we had missed such an obvious use for something we'd worked so hard on. In the following weeks, I shared the story with anybody who would listen and suggested them to go to the store and try it out for themselves. The teams took that input and developed a TouchSmart version that would support a kiosk offering. Today, if you go into Sam's Club or visit Chicago O'Hare Airport, you'll see the TouchSmart kiosks in action. So what should you take away from this story? The person buying your product doesn't see it as an end solution. They see it as a tool that will help them solve their problem. For example, I hate this tiny bakery. I can't hold or display everything I'm capable of offering. I'm losing out to bigger competitors. When I physically print out pictures and put them in a photo album for my customers, they get grimy, dirty, unappealing in a matter of weeks, yet I don't have the time to swap out the pictures on a regular basis. I need something simple and efficient that will showcase my wares, take orders when I'm too busy. That's the problem for this bakery. Your customer looks at what you're developing as a tool for them to achieve their objective. I love being surprised on the job, and our local bakery showed me something I'd never considered. Now its owner doesn't think he did anything that interesting. To him, it's a completely logical way to address his need. The fact that it never occurred to us to offer a TouchSmart as the solution didn't stop him from figuring it out for himself. So, figuring out who uses your product in a way you never intended can unlock new opportunities you would have never considered. You want to potentially double your sales? Go out there and ask yourself, who is using my product in a way I never intended, and how are they using it? Now, don't stop there. Ask yourself, what problems, needs are you looking to address? Are you so tightly focused on what you believe your customers' problems and needs to be that you are missing out on potentially huge opportunities? How could you identify existing customers and observe how they use your product? Is there a way to give your potential customers an opportunity to play with and use your product without giving them specific parameters for how, when, and why they should use it? What ideas do they come up with? If you are willing to listen, your customers will tell you what they see as the value from what you are offering. I'm Phil McKinney, and thanks for listening. Thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join in. If you have any comments or suggestions, drop me a note over at phil@killerinnovations.com. Now, the reason I've been doing this show since 2005 is to pay back my early mentor by paying it forward. My first mentor, Bob Davis, invested an immense amount of time in training and coaching me, which had a major impact on my career. When I went back and asked him how I could pay him back, he just laughed and said I couldn't. I had to pay it forward. If I could ask for a favor, could you help me pay it forward? How? 1, give us a rating wherever you get your podcast, as that helps spread the word. And 2, by telling others about the show. This episode of Killer Innovations was produced by the Innovators Network. You can find the show notes and the entire show catalog over at killerinnovations.com. I'll talk to you next week. In the meantime, go out and change the world with your killer innovation. Bye-bye.